gremlins? It may only just be September, but I don't care, it's spooky season. Hence, the slightly vampiric outfit and Halloween nails. And to celebrate spooky season, and to use up several bags of thrifted shirts I've been saving to paint, I'm going to be painting a bunch of one-of-a-kind spooky designs on shirts, to put up on my Etsy in early October. A specific date is yet to be decided, but if this interests you, subscribe and/or follow me on Instagram for updates. Today's video is the first of several videos painting shirts, and I have 2 interesting designs to work on today. So without further ado, let's get started. Before I get started, here's the sketch I made of the first design in my sketchbook. Here's the shirt I'm painting, just a plain large black t-shirt, and here's that shirt with the design sketched out. I used watercolor pencil for my sketches on the shirts, because after I finish painting, if any of the sketch lines are still visible, I can easily wash them out. During the filming of this painting process, the brightness kept adjusting, which, when sped up, causes a slow flashing effect. If you are photosensitive, please be warned. This design is focused entirely on the line art. There is no color or shading in the design, just white lines on a black background. The design is a mushroom with a dozen eyes on its cap instead of spots. The mushroom is loosely based on the fly agaric mushroom, which is the recognizable toadstool, but this mushroom has a taller and less wide cap, and of course, it's watching you, which normal fly agaric mushrooms do not do. The eyes are all looking in different directions too, the irises in different locations. Each eye has a large iris and pupil, and is ringed with both eyelashes and sketchy wrinkles. The eyes are really easy to paint. I'm one of those people who draws solitary eyes a lot for fun, so they're easy for me to draw at this point. I also have had several eye-focused school art projects, one of which involved many eyes without a logical source watching the main figure. The main struggle of this piece was avoiding putting my hand on the wet paint and then either smudging it or transferring white paint to places it wasn't supposed to go. For the most part I succeeded, and the few bits of white paint that did transfer, I was able to remove with some acetone and soap. I'm not sure where I got the idea of an eyeball mushroom from exactly. I probably saw some art with this concept on Tumblr or Pinterest, but I wasn't copying a specific design when I was drawing my version. It has just been living rent-free in my head for ages. I find myself fascinated with spooky eye designs, and this isn't the only design in my Halloween shirt sketches that involves a thing having more eyes than it should. When I finished the first layer of paint, I let the shirt dry and then did a second coat over the outlines of the mushrooms and parts of the eyes, leaving other parts of the eyes with just one coat for a slight bit of variation. It was actually several days between layer 1 and layer 2. I work outside, and we had a few days of very strong wind, which I did not want to try and work with. Unfortunately, while filming, my camera kept auto-adjusting the brightness, which, when sped up, makes the whole thing look like it's slowly flashing. I finally worked out how to lock the brightness, but not until I was filming the reveal footage, so hopefully this will be the last time I have this problem, and the next lot of shirts won't start flashing. I think the auto brightness was having trouble toggling between the dark of the shirt and my very pale hand in the middle of the frame. I had fun with this painting process. It was simple and line-focused, which I don't usually do in my clothing painting, but I liked the design. The elements of the graphic were easy for me to draw, and I think it looks really cool and spooky. The next t-shirt design is quite different, focused more on shapes, colour, and texture than on line, and with a lot more layers of paint involved. Here's the rough sketch I drew when brainstorming all my shirt ideas, and here's that sketch on the plain black t-shirt, although this sketch was drawn with a grey pencil, so it is quite faint. I started this painting process by laying down a flat, pale brown coat of paint over the entire shape and letting that dry. Having one thin layer of pale colour between the black fabric and the rest of my paint means the rest of my colours are more saturated and aren't tinted with black, making the process of painting easier. Unfortunately, while painting my first layer, the camera I was using filled up and stopped recording, so I had to skip to several days later when I began to work on my second layer of paint. This design is a teddy bear that has been altered, customized, and turned punk. I'm loosely inspired by the custom plushie designs by Radis, mostly because I want to try customizing a thrifted plushie of my own, and therefore the idea has been in my head. The second layer of paint is another layer of pale brown, but this time only on the parts of the teddy bear that aren't going to be another colour. I left the bases of the feet, the centre of the ears, and the patch in the centre of the bear's tummy blank, to avoid using too many layers of paint. After this second layer of pale brown, I could still see bits of black through the paint, so I added a third layer, this time with texture to make the bear look fluffy. I mixed up a darker shade of brown and a mid-tone shade, and basically used a pointillism method to dot patches of those browns onto the bear's fabric, making each limb look rounded by adding darker brown to the undersides and light brown to the tops. I believe this method is called stippling, and it worked really well. I kept the bear's snout smooth, like it's made with less textured material, but all the other fur visible looks fluffy now. I finished the fur by adding an even darker shade of brown to areas with strong shadows, such as the joint between limb and body. I also decided to make the arm pads also fluffy, and save the fabric patches, which I'm adding in a bit, for the ears and feet, so I went back and added texture to the hands. The bear has patches of fabric sewn on the bottoms of their feet and the insides of their ears, fabric patches that would have been added during their customization. On their left foot, I started by painting the whole patch red, doing the same to the right ear. While that was drying, I painted their left ear and right foot black, then painted the black of the choker I'm adding around their neck. Next, I painted the patch on the bear's stomach white, to add detail to later. That patch took 2 layers of white to prevent any bleed-through of the darker shirt fabric beneath, and on the second layer I added some grey to my paint to make the patch look rounded, like it's been sewn onto a round body. With the remaining grey-white paint, I painted the first layer of spikes onto the bear's choker. Then I went back to the foot and ear fabric to add some shading, let that dry, and began patterning the fabric. On the red foot and ear, I added thin black stripes, which were harder than I thought they would be to keep even, especially with a lack of thin brushes that aren't worn down to the point of not being a point anymore. On the black foot and ear, I added extra fabric medium to make some red paint translucent, then created a plaid pattern, letting all parallel red stripes dry before adding perpendicular ones. While I was waiting for those stripes to dry, I began adding eye and nose holes to the skull on the bear's chest, although the white wasn't really dry enough, so the black turned into dark grey and I had to add more black paint later. The red stripes on the black foot and ear patches dried, so I went back to add the next layer. Where the red stripes overlap, the red is much more saturated and intense, giving the fabric the look I wanted. I've never tried this method of making plaid with real paint before, but this is basically the method I use for making plaid digitally, and it worked shockingly well in real life. I then spent several minutes trying to block out the sun. It isn't visible on camera, but off-screen I have a very precarious tower of stools, with a hoodie draped over them, trying to cast a shadow on the part of the shirt that wasn't under the shade of the table I was working under. The sun is my constant enemy when trying to film painting. It makes it so either a chunk of the shirt is way overexposed or way underexposed. I work in the shade when I can, but sadly, the location of the shade moves, and I was too stubborn to move with it. Back to the shirt, I went back to the spiked choker and began adding high contrast shading to make the metal spikes look shiny. I used black for the shadows and white for the highlights to make it as high contrast as possible. Sorry my hair is in the frame, by the way. Up until this point I'd done pretty well at keeping my head out of the way, but I guess I was leaning in too close to work on the details. I went back and added another coat of black to the skull's eyes and nose, and this time the black stayed black and didn't mix with the white to turn grey. I also added lines to indicate teeth. Finally, I began to work on the face. One eye is a red button, which just started out as a red circle. I added darker red circles for the buttonholes and a line of dark red down one side to make the button seem 3D. The bear has a very normal brown nose and stitched-on mouth. I used more of that brown to add seams down the bear's arms, and a line around one arm where I'll add stitches to indicate a repaired severed hand. I then began to add black stitches around each fabric patch, the feet pads, then the skull. Most of the stitches are straight lines, but a few stitches are X's for variety. I then added a final large X of stitches for the teddy bear's other eye. I added some piercings to the bear's ears, including a safety pin through one ear, and added a highlight to their button eye. Finally, I added some soft white stuffing spilling out of a tear in the bear's arm, and with that, both shirts are completed and set aside to dry. I let the shirts dry, then ironed them, and now it's time to show them off. Starting with the first one I completed, this one only took 2 layers of paint, so it was completed fairly quickly. It's a fairly simple design, monochromatic, but I really like it. It's nice and spooky. This shirt is a size L shirt, and will be available on my Etsy in early October. And now to show it in more detail. So this is a closer-up view of the graphic of this shirt. Obviously, most of the detail is present on the cap of the mushroom, where instead of spots, like would be on a regular fly agaric type mushroom, which is my inspiration, although it's not quite the shape of a fly agaric, well, instead of spots, there are eyes. The main lines of the eyes are all fairly solid white, or as best as I can get with a white acrylic paint, but around the eyes there's more sketchy lines to kind of show 3D-ness and some detail. Also, I just think sketchier lines make it look a bit more spooky and hand-drawn, which is what I was going for. You can also see kind of that more sketchy look with the skirt of the mushroom. So yeah, reminder that this is a size large. Specific measurements, because I know that clothing sizes are so inconsistent between brands, specific measurements will be available on the shop listing once this is posted. Then this shirt is definitely my favorite out of the two. I'm so happy with how this design turned out. I honestly probably am going to make this, like, similar designs like this again, with various punked up teddy bears and stuffed animals. I want to make one for myself now. But this one will also be available on my Etsy in early October. Again, the date is to be decided. This one took a lot more effort because there's a lot more colors involved, a lot more layers, but it was so much fun to work on, and I'm so happy with how it came out. So let's also see this one in a bit more detail. And this is the second design. Obviously there's a lot more detail to look into. Also, this shirt, I forgot to mention this earlier, this shirt is a size 9. I think that means it's a small, or somewhere around small. It definitely looks small, so again, specific measurements of like the chest size and the shirt length and stuff will be available on the Etsy listing. But anyway, the details of this design. There's a little safety pin through one of the bear's ears, and in this ear they've got a couple ring piercings. Also, the pattern, like there's like fabric been sewn onto the pads of their feet and onto their ears, and it is asymmetrical. So on their left ear and their right foot, they've got a black fabric with red gingham pattern, plaid pattern, whatever it's called. And then on their left foot and right ear, I hope I got those right, I'm not great at left and right, they've got a black and red striped fabric. Then on their face, one eye is just an X'd out stitches and the other eye is a red button. And then they've got like a regular nose and stuff. I didn't do anything with that. They've got a spike choker around their neck. One arm has been sewn back together with a layer of stitches, like it got ripped off or cut off or something. And the other arm is currently ripped and spilling stuffing out. And then sewn onto their chest is a skull. Like this would be a fabric skull or something with like the eyes either painted on, or maybe it was a piece of fabric that had the skull pattern on it that's been cut out and then sewn in place with some stitches. Some of the stitches are X's and some of them are straight lines to provide more of that DIY variety. And I'm just so happy with it. So anyway, that's this design. And those are the 2 designs from this week's video. Remember, if you're interested in either of these shirts, dates are forthcoming. Follow me on YouTube and also on my Instagram, which is at this address, to hear more updates about the sale. For example, when I have a specific date in mind, I want to complete a few more shirts before I do that to make sure I'll be able to actually be ready in time for the date. So please follow me on all the platforms if you are interested in buying these shirts. I'm so happy with them. These are like, this one at least is one of the best shirts I think I've ever painted. So, until next week, where I'm going to be painting a few more shirts, bye!